And so this was the vision of Robinson, and was depicted here by the artist as the pilgrims here are leaving Delfthaven and on their way over to England. They're going to be shuttled to England, over to Plymouth, and there they're going to rendezvous with a larger ship, the Mayflower. And the Mayflower also has some separatists and other just jolly old blokes that came off the streets of England. Now, what is going to happen in this expedition is new to America in this regard. It's true that Jamestown, there have been numerous attempts to try to establish a colony there, but it was always groups of men mostly interested in finding their fortune and finding gold. This was a very different kind of expedition because this, as you can see, is men, women, and children. And they are coming. The first thing that happened was a little bit like a family vacation. The idea was to start across the North Atlantic in the summertime. And as you think about family vacations, sometimes they start with somebody forgetting their wallet, forgetting to lock the door of the house, forgetting to bring a suitcase, and so they had a couple of fitful starts. The fitful starts particularly were because this ship, the Speedwell, when it put to sea, started leaking. Now, leaking is not a good thing in the North Atlantic. And so they had to go back, had the ship recaulked. The Speedwell started out again, and under heavy sail, she started leaking again. So they brought her back, finally made the decision to leave the Speedwell, to sell it, and to put as many of these different people we call pilgrims into the Mayflower. Turns out 102 of them. And so they were all packed as tight as could be into the Mayflower. Speedwell is left behind, and that, of course, delayed their getting off, and so they got off later in the year at a more dangerous time in the North Atlantic. As they were on that trip to begin with, as you can imagine, the first thing that happened was they started to get seasick. And if anybody's been seasick badly and been on a little small ship being tossed about by the waves, it can be pretty miserable. There was a bosun's mate that made fun of them. He called them puke stockings or puke socks, and he said they were kind of green colored, and he said, "We're going to be feeding you to the fish pretty soon. We're going to sew you up in a sail and put a brick at your feet and push you overboard, and you're going to be dying and all." Well, what happened is the storms got worse and worse, and even the sailors got concerned. Turns out the one guy, the bosun's mate that was teasing them, making fun of them, he just sort of amazingly within one day got very sick and died, and he was the first one that went overboard. In the meantime, the storms got more and more severe in the Mayflower, and you can imagine 102 of these pilgrims basically underneath the decks, not safe to go on deck, underneath the decks, seasick, lots of kids down there, men and women, packed into these tight quarters and being just tossed about continuously by the storms. And they were a noteworthy group. These people did very little complaining, and it would have been an absolutely miserable time. How long were they down underneath that deck with the storms banging them around? Well, on the main part of their expedition coming across from Plymouth, England, over to the North America continent, that was a 66-day trip. That's, in other words, 2 months of being under. Now, there was one young man that made the decision that he wasn't going to stay down there. It smelled so bad, it was so crowded and so noisy and intolerable, he decided he was going to go up on deck. He went up on deck, and all of a sudden the deck dropped out from underneath him, and he found himself in the middle of the North Atlantic in November. That water will wake you up in November. And it's estimated that he wouldn't have lasted more than a few minutes at that temperature. But at that time, the Mayflower was knocked over by such a severe blow that some of the rigging dragged in the water, and as he was drowning, he put his hand out, grasped the piece of rope. He's turning blue, he's so cold, holds onto it, and is hauled back on deck. He went down like a halfway drowned rat down below and did not return back again on deck until there was a safe time to come up after they had sighted land.